A tree being struck by lightning. I couldn't find an image more apt than this to introduce this topic to you. Hello and welcome to bmclounge.com. Today we are discussing risk, probability and impact assessment. Now, before we talk about this topic, let me remind you, if you're into reading articles, first link in the description is going to take you to a relevant article on this topic over at our official website bmclounge.com. Also, second link in the description is going to take you to an entire playlist of every single video that we have done on risk management knowledge area. So two important links, do check them out. Let's get started. So time for a couple of questions. How do you determine if a risk is big or small? How do you determine that? Secondly, how do you figure out how likely the risk is going to occur or the risk is going to materialize? In the previous slide, we saw a tree being struck by lightning. How likely is that risk to occur? How likely do you think the tree nearby you will be struck by lightning? Very less likely, right? So since it is less likely that the tree near you is going to be struck by lightning, do you think this risk is a big risk or a small risk? Keep your answers with you. You'll have the answer by the end of this video. Let's move on. So the risk management plan comes at rescue here. There is a section in this plan which talks about the definitions of probability and impact, definition of risk probability and impact assessment. First of all, you need to figure out how likely is it that the risk is going to materialize. You are going to do this by assigning a probability value based on the likelihood of the risk's occurrence. So you are actually going to assign a numerical probability value to the risk. So the risk of the tree being struck by lightning, is that high probability or is that low probability? Possibly low, right? The tree near you, do you think it will be struck by lightning in the next 10 days, next 10 years, next 50 years? Very less likely. This is not something that we often see. Number two, once you have the probability value figured out, you are then going to work towards estimating the cost or the impact of the risk if it does materialize. Now let's give a numerical value of the impact if the tree was indeed struck by lightning. What do you think the impact is going to be? It is going to be pretty high. The entire tree might just burn up in flames. So although the probability of the tree being struck by lightning is pretty less, but the impact, if it does happen, is very, very high. Now, when you are going to use these values, you will be able to interpret which risks need a pretty solid mitigation plan, while which ones can be monitored as your project progresses. So just like the tree and the lightning risk that you will have several risks in your project, right? And you are going to provide the values of probability and impact for all those risks. And based on these values, you are going to be able to interpret which of these risks need a pretty solid mitigation plan. These should be high priority risks and which ones are low priority. A quick reminder before we move ahead, all our PMP courseware articles and videos are available on this link, pmclounge.com/PMP training. Everything's free. Check it out. So let's take a look at an example of the risk probability scale. So here's an example, and this is something which should be available in your risk management plan. So the probability of the risk materializing, if you give it a value of 0.1, the idea here is that there is a very minute chance of this risk actually materializing. The probability value is just 0.1. When the probability value that you provide is 0.3, the understanding is that the risk is unlikely to occur. If the risk may occur, you should give it a value of 0.5. If the risk is very likely to occur, you should give it a value of 0.7. And if there is a very high probability that the risk is going to occur, the value that you should give is 0.9. The risk is almost here. So this table is something that you need to define in your risk management plan. Obviously, changes to this is also possible. This is not a standard table. For your project, you may have only 4 values, right? You may come up with only 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, and 0.8. Only 4 values, and you may define your probability risk scale as low, moderate, high, and very high. So it totally depends on the type of project and the project team to create this definition, but this definition should be available in the risk management plan. Let's take a look at an example of the impact assessment scale as well. So this is the definition of impact assessment. So on scope, let's say, what is the impact on scope if the value of impact that you're providing is 0.1? That means this is a barely noticeable change. So let's say a risk materializes and its impact on scope is something which is not even noticeable, then the impact value of that risk you are going to give is 0.1. If you think that there is an unacceptable change in the project scope because of this risk, the impact of this risk is such that it is going to have an unacceptable change in your project scope, then the value of impact that you should give for this risk should be 0.7. Similarly, 0.3 for minor areas affected, 0.5 for important areas affected, and 0.9 if the objective of the project itself is changing. If there's a risk that materializes and it totally changes the objective of the project, then the impact value that you should give for that risk should be 0.9. Similarly, you have cost. And by the way, just like the previous slide, this table should be present in your risk management plan. And based on these values is how you are going to assess the impact of your project risks. So if there's an insignificant cost increase by a risk that materializes, the impact is going to be 0.1. Less than 10% cost increase, then 0.3. 10 to 20% is 0.5. 20 to 40% is cost increase is 0.7. More than 40% cost increase, the impact value that you should give to that risk is 0.9. Similarly, schedule. Now, there are different pronunciations of this word, schedule. So I pronounce it as schedule. You might pronounce it as schedule. Some people might pronounce it as schedule. So there are different pronunciations of this word. I observed some people notice this in some of our schedule management knowledge area videos, so I thought of mentioning this. So if the impact on schedule is very low, if the impact is, let's say, just 1 day, which can be absorbed as part of your project schedule itself, then the impact assessment value that you should provide to that risk is 0.1. Similarly, if there's less than 5% change to the schedule, the impact value should be 0.3. 0.5 if there's a 5 to 10% change in the schedule. If there's 10 to 20% change to schedule, the impact for this risk should be 0.7. 0.9 if 20% of your project schedule changes due to this risk materializing. So I hope you are able to figure out how you're going to provide the probability as well as impact values based on the definitions provided in your risk management plan. So P into I is going to give you a value which is a topic for some other video some other day, but I hope you're able to understand how probability and impact assessment is done for your project risks. Question for this video: who all from the project team should be involved to create the definitions of risk, probability, and impact assessment? In the last two slides, we saw the definitions. We saw which risk should be given 0.1 for probability and which risk should be given 0.9 for the impact if it does materialize. So who should come up with these definitions? Who from the project team should come up with these definitions? Let me know in the comments. Looking forward to your answer. So that is all that we had in this video. Hope you got value out of it. Smash that like button if you did, because it keeps us motivated to create more free content for you. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to stay notified whenever we upload new videos. Also, don't forget to check out the website pmclounge.com, your #1 free PMP resource. Thank you.